They came by the millions, across the Atlantic Ocean, across borders and languages, carrying little more than suitcases, family photographs, and belief in a promise that in America, work meant dignity, effort meant opportunity, and the future could be built by your own hands. In the late 19th century, the United States was transforming faster than any nation in history. Railroads stretched across a continent, steel towers began rising into the sky, factories roared day and night. From a distance, it looked like progress. It looked like success. It looked like the American dream. But step closer. Behind the smokestack stood crowded neighborhoods where sunlight rarely reached the streets. Families lived packed into single rooms. Children worked instead of learning, and workers risked their lives each day just to survive the next. America was becoming rich, astonishingly rich. Yet prosperity did not spread evenly. For some, industrialization meant fortunes. For others, it meant survival. The same system that created opportunity also created inequality. Today, we step inside the cities that built modern America, not to see the success story, but the human cost behind it. Because the American dream was real, but for millions, it came with a price. The immigrant flood. Millions arrive. By the late 1800s, the world was on the move. Not explorers, not soldiers, but families. They came from Southern and Eastern Europe, Italians escaping poverty, Poles fleeing political repression, Russians and Jews running from violence and persecution, farmers who could no longer survive on shrinking land. For many, America was not simply a dream, it was an escape. After weeks at sea, ships entered New York Harbor and passengers saw a new world rising ahead. But before stepping into it, they passed through one place, Ellis Island. Here, doctors checked their health in seconds. Officials examined documents just as quickly. A chalk mark on a coat could decide a future, entry or return. Most were allowed in, and they did not arrive one by one. They arrived by the millions. But the America they entered was not farmland waiting to be claimed. It was an industrial nation hungry for labor. Factories needed workers who would accept long hours. Railroads needed men who would lay track in dangerous conditions. Mines needed bodies small enough to crawl into narrow shafts. Employers quickly realized something important. New arrivals would work for less. Wages dropped. Jobs became replaceable. A worker injured or exhausted could simply be replaced by another shipload arriving next week. Industrial growth accelerated, powered not just by machines but by vulnerability. America's rapid expansion depended on people who had the fewest choices. The tenement world, life in the cities. Industry did not just create jobs, it created cities, almost overnight. Between the 1880s and early 1900s, urban populations surged. New York, Chicago, and Pittsburgh swelled faster than they could be planned. Workers needed homes close to factories, so builders constructed housing quickly and cheaply. They were called tenements. Tall brick buildings filled entire blocks, each floor divided into tiny apartments. A single room might hold an entire family. Windows were rare, fresh air even rarer. Hallways stayed dark during the day. In summer, heat became suffocating. In winter, disease spread easily through damp walls and shared spaces. Bathrooms were often not inside the apartment at all. Dozens of residents shared a single outdoor toilet in the courtyard. Clean water was limited. Garbage piled in the streets. Outbreaks of tuberculosis and cholera moved faster than doctors could respond. For millions, this was daily life, the price of living near work. Then, a reformer brought the hidden world into public view. Journalist Jacob Riis walked these neighborhoods at night with a camera, capturing images few Americans had ever seen. His book, How the Other Half Lives, revealed crowded rooms, exhausted families, and children sleeping beside factory equipment. Middle-class readers were shocked. The industrial city they believed symbolized progress contained suffering they had never imagined. Modern cities were rising, but the quality of human life inside them was collapsing. Factory life, work without safety. For millions of Americans, the industrial age was not experienced in offices or markets, but on factory floors. A typical workday began before sunrise and ended after dark. 10, sometimes 14 hours of labor, 6 days a week. There were no weekends as we know them today. No paid sick leave, no injury compensation. If you could not work, you did not earn. Factories were designed for speed, not safety. Machines spun rapidly, their gears and belts exposed. A moment of distraction could pull in a sleeve, a hand, sometimes an entire arm. Accidents were common. Crushed fingers, broken backs, fatal falls into machinery. And when it happened, production did not stop. Another worker stepped forward. Children were part of this world too. In textile mills, their small hands repaired moving threads. In coal mines, they crawled through narrow shafts, opening ventilation doors. In workshops, they carried materials heavier than they were. Families depended on every wage, no matter how small. Employers followed a simple logic. There were always more workers arriving than jobs available. A laborer injured today could be replaced tomorrow. Efficiency ruled the factory, measured in output, not in human well-being. Industrial progress increased production, but it placed production above people. Women in industry, the double burden. Industrialization did not only transform men's work, it brought millions of women into the wage economy for the first time in American history. They stitched clothing in garment factories, prepared food in processing plants, and worked as domestic servants in homes wealthier than their own. Their wages were lower than men's, often less than half. Yet their responsibilities did not shrink. After long factory shifts, many returned home to cook, clean, and care for children. Work followed them everywhere. Inside factories, conditions were harsh. Supervisors enforced speed and silence. Complaints risked dismissal. Harassment was common and rarely punished. Then, in 1911, tragedy revealed the danger the public had long ignored. At the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory in New York City, a fire broke out near closing time. Flames spread rapidly across the upper floors. But many exit doors were locked, a common practice meant to prevent breaks and theft. Workers rushed to escape. Some crowded stairways that filled with smoke. Others climbed to windows with no path down. In less than half an hour, 146 people, most of them young immigrant women, were dead. The nation watched in horror. Newspapers printed photographs. Funerals filled the streets. For the first time, many Americans confronted a painful truth. Industrial progress without safety had consequences measured in lives. Modern industry had advanced, but human protection had not kept pace. Child labor, childhood lost. In the industrial city, childhood changed. For many families, survival required every member to earn, even the youngest. Children worked in textile mills, tying broken threads while machines still ran. They sorted coal in mines, breathing dust for hours at a time. They sold newspapers in crowded streets long after dark. The pay was small, but necessary. A few cents a day could mean food on the table. Employers valued young workers for a simple reason. They were cheap, obedient, and small enough to fit where adults could not. School often came second, or not at all. Some Americans accepted this as normal. Others began to question it. Photographer Lewis Hine traveled across the country documenting working children. His images showed exhausted faces, bandaged hands, and children standing beside machines taller than they were. The photographs circulated in newspapers and public exhibitions. For many citizens, it was the first time they had seen the hidden workforce behind industrial prosperity. Public opinion slowly began to change. The industrial economy depended not only on adult labor, but on the labor of children who gave up their childhood to keep it running. The wealth gap. Two different Americas. By the late 19th century, America had become astonishingly wealthy. In some neighborhoods, electric lights glowed above marble staircases. Families traveled in private railroad cars. Evenings were spent at formal dinners and elaborate parties where fortunes were discussed as casually as the weather. But only a few streets away, another America existed. Families crowded into single rooms. Meals were uncertain. Disease spread easily through dark and damp housing. Children worked to help pay rent. Workers labored all week and still struggled to survive. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Extreme wealth beside constant hardship. Writers began searching for a name for this era. Author Mark Twain described it as the Gilded Age, a society covered in gold on the surface, but troubled underneath. The nation was richer than ever before, yet prosperity was unevenly shared. Industrialization increased wealth, but it did not increase equality. Workers begin to resist the early labor movement. For years, workers endured the conditions of industrial life in silence. Long hours, low wages, and dangerous workplaces were treated as unavoidable facts. But slowly, patience began to break. Laborers realized that alone they had little power. Together they might have a voice. Organizations formed across the country. The Knights of Labor welcomed skilled and unskilled workers alike, hoping to unite all laborers into one movement. Later, the American Federation of Labor focused on practical goals: higher pay, shorter hours, and safer conditions for its members. Their demands were simple: a fair wage for a fair day's work, protection from injury, and time to live beyond the factory. When negotiations failed, workers turned to strikes. In 1886, a labor rally in Chicago ended in violence during the Haymarket Affair. A bomb exploded as police moved to disperse the crowd. Panic followed, shots were fired, and both officers and civilians died. The nation reacted with fear, and labor movements were suddenly viewed with suspicion. 8 years later, railroad workers protested wage cuts in the Pullman strike. Rail traffic across much of the country stopped. The federal government intervened, sending troops to restore operations. Clashes left workers injured and killed. Again and again, authorities sided with maintaining order and protecting industry. To business leaders, strikes threatened economic stability. To workers, they were the only remaining tool. Conflict between labor and industry was no longer rare. It was becoming a defining feature of modern America. Industrial society had created opposing interests, and confrontation between them was becoming inevitable. Public opinion changes, the birth of reform. For years, the harsh realities of industrial life remained largely unseen by those living outside factory districts. But by the early 20th century, that began to change. Newspapers started publishing detailed reports about dangerous workplaces, child labor, and crowded housing. Stories once confined to poor neighborhoods now reached middle-class homes at breakfast tables across the country. Journalists investigated corruption, unsafe products, and corporate abuses. Their reporting, often called muckraking, revealed that industrial progress carried hidden costs. Readers reacted with shock and concern. Reform groups formed in growing numbers. Civic organizations pushed for sanitation laws, workplace inspections, and housing standards. Churches spoke about moral responsibility, arguing that prosperity meant little without justice. Gradually, the conversation shifted. The question was no longer whether industry created wealth. Everyone could see it did. The question became whether society should protect the people who created that wealth. Politicians began proposing regulations, limits on child labor, safety requirements in factories, and oversight of powerful corporations. This moment marked the beginning of a new national attitude, one that believed government could improve social conditions rather than simply observe them. Historians would later call it the Progressive Era. Industrial America was no longer accepted as it was. Citizens had begun demanding that progress include protection. The cost of progress. Between the late 1800s and the early 1900s, the United States changed faster than at any other time in its history. Industry created enormous wealth. Cities rose where farmland once stood. New machines transformed daily life and reshaped the economy. America had become modern, but progress carried a cost. Workers labored long hours in dangerous conditions. Families struggled in crowded neighborhoods. Wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, while millions lived on the edge of survival. The nation was richer, yet deeply divided. Conflict between labor and industry became unavoidable, and society began to ask a new question: who should benefit from prosperity? Out of that tension came reform, regulation, and the first steps toward workplace protection. The American dream did not disappear, but it had to be redefined. Not as opportunity for a few, but as fairness for many. The story of industrial America was not only about invention and success, it was about people demanding dignity within a system they helped build. And the struggle was far from over, because Americans were no longer just creating wealth, they were preparing to fight over who deserved it. Thank you for watching. If you found this piece of history compelling, please like this video and subscribe for more stories that shaped our world.